right, this is video number 2 in the portfolio document creation. And this is going to be a short one. All we're going to do is create the InDesign file and then specify some of the basic margin and layout information. So this is assuming that you've already downloaded the Blurb book creator. You'll need to do that before you proceed with this video. So reference the previous video if you haven't done that yet. But I'm going to go to File once I've got InDesign open here. And instead of New, which would be our typical path to creating a new document, I'm going to skip that and scroll all the way down to Blurb Book Creator, which opens up this dialog box, which allows us to create a project specifically for print through Blurb. And so you can see I've got my previous portfolio template, which I generated this way. So I'm going to do this again. So I'll select Create New Book. And I'm going to title it, call it Portfolio 2. I am the author. And then this is where you would select the end output. And again, down the line, if you're doing this again, or maybe you're using Blurb or you're not using Blurb, it's always good before you start investing any amount of time or effort into the design of really any printed or digital document, that you understand the final format, right? So there's no point investing 10 hours designing an 8.5 by 11 portfolio if that's not the format that I intend to print, right? So even if you're not, selecting this magazine option down the road, again, it's just always good practice to sort of think about the final printed format or digital format of what you're making before you invest any time in making it. And I think that's something that's maybe not always front of mind when you start to design your first portfolio. But we're going to select this magazine because it's a good format and it's cheap. We're going to select the only option for paper type, which would be this 80-pound text magazine paper. We're going to change the only option we have for the type of cover. This is the binding, so it's going to be a soft cover and it's perfect bound, so it's basically just going to be sort of folded around the pages themselves. I don't care about the number of pages because we can change this later. The only thing to know about the number of pages is that it has to be increased or decreased by increments of 4. And that's because, they're using larger than 8.5 by 11 paper to print each spread, basically. And each, let's say, 11 by 17 page that they're printing on has a front and a back, which would be 4 pages total. So it's not really possible to add or subtract pages from the document in increments smaller than that. So it's one thing to keep in mind as you start to increase the length of the document, is that it has to be increased or decreased by multiples of 4. So anyways, we're going to leave this alone. And that's really all we had to specify. Right now it's set to not print with a logo. They're $7 each, which is pretty cheap for a 20-page document. And all we have to do is really create this pages template. So I'm going to hit Create Pages Template. It wants me to pick somewhere to save the actual InDesign document that it's going to generate for us. So I'm just going to use my desktop and hit Save. And there we go. It's created this template for us. The only other thing to do, and this is important to know when you start designing this document, is that the cover is separate, right? So right now it's generated the pages of our document. So all of the inside pages. The cover is a different piece of material. It's got a different weight. It's a heavier stock. It's got a different coating on it. And so the cover is going to be printed separately. And once you've finished designing the magazine, then you could generate the cover if you wanted to. And what it's going to do is generate a document that is the correct size, basically. You can imagine a 240-page magazine is going to be a lot thicker than a 20-page magazine. So the same size paper would not work for both of those different formats. So if I generate the cover template now with only 20 pages, it's not going to fit if I add or subtract any pages from that document. So it's important to do this last, not first. And right now, all we need is what we've already generated, which is the InDesign document. So I'm just going to hit Done to accept that. And you can see it's given us this template. So we've got 20 pages here. This would be our very first inside page. So when you open up that cover, this would be the page that we're looking at. But you can see that by default, it's given us sort of these instructions, and it's already generated our bleed margin for us. So anything that we want to appear as if it's extending all the way to the end of the page, we would actually pull out farther to this bleed margin so it can be trimmed down to the actual page size. And then it's got this safe art margin, which is basically telling you that anything that you really want that's critical information, you shouldn't put too close to the edge, because if something terrible went wrong and it was just offset by a lot, then it might get trimmed off. So it's not really relevant to what we're trying to do. So the first thing we need to do is just get rid of this, because we obviously can't start to really design and lay out this document with a bunch of gray boxes on every page. So we need to come over here to layers. And again, if your workspace doesn't look like this, I would recommend adding some of these, especially your pages and layers, but also things like your paragraph and character styles, your alignment tools, your Pathfinder tools, your effects, swatches, stroke. All of these things are going to be important tools that we'll use. So I would recommend just installing that workspace that I provided, or making yours look somewhat similar to this so that you can kind of follow along. But anyway, so I'm going to go to my layers. I'm just going to change this to content, because I think your design goes here is kind of silly. And I'm just going to hide the instructions layer, because we don't need that. And the last thing that we'll do in this video is set up our margins. So what I'm not going to do is, I'm going to go back to my pages so I can see everything here. What I'm not going to do is select, within a particular spread, and then go to layout, margins and columns, and start to change things. Just change that top margin to 2 inches, just for an example, because it's only changing that one spread, right? Which is not what I want. I don't want to have to individually manipulate this document, spread by spread or page by page. So I'm going to hit undo, and what we'll do is go into this A parent. So this is our first parent page that comes with our document by default. And you can see that it's got an A as a prefix, and that there's a little A in the corner of every single page in this document. And that's because all of these pages by default have this parent page applied to them, right? So instead, if I went to my parent page and I zoom out so you can see that we're no longer in the document, all I have is this one spread to look at. And then I make a change to my margins and columns, and I will actually just punch in the margins and columns that we want for our document, which are, first I'm going to click this link to make sure that we change all 4 at once. It's just easier that way. And I'm going to use my arrow keys to go up to 0.625, so 5/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to uncheck that link so that I can just edit one of these. I'm going to use these arrows now to increase the bottom margin up to 1 inch. The reason for that is that we want our page numbers to be sandwiched down here. So we want that bottom margin to be a little bit thicker, so we've got space to accommodate that. And it doesn't appear to be too kind of tight with our content. And then I will add a column. We just need 2. I could add as many as I wanted this way, but for our purposes, we're just going to have a 2-column layout. So I will do 2 columns, and then I'm going to make that 3/8 of an inch. So 0.375. And this is the specifications of our document. So I will hit OK to accept that. And now you can see that when I double click to get back to a spread, so I sort of re-enter my document now, if I scroll through this, all of these pages have updated automatically because they have this parent page applied to them, which again, we can confirm because there's a little A prefix in the corner of all those pages. So it's a much faster, much cleaner way to set the layout. And I will rename this parent page. I will name it spread, because this is going to be sort of the default layout for all of our normal spreads. So any page or series of pages that is just containing our typical sort of portfolio content is going to have this spread prefix or parent page applied to it. So I will hit OK, and now we can see that that's changed to a spread, and that's it. That's as far as we'll go in this video. The next one we'll start to set up the paragraph and character styles so that we can start to distinguish the typographic hierarchy that we'll be using to lay out content.